I'm a timber cruiser along the Kentucky border. Last October, I found a child's bonnet nailed to an oak tree, the bark weeping a foul black grease. Then, a voice called from the fog. It sounded exactly like my grandmother, who died 12 years ago. But when I flashed my headlamp into the brush, I didn't see a woman. I saw something starved down to the gray bone, with the unhinged skull of a draft mule. The state asphalt stops cold at the mouth of the gap, turning into an unmarked logging trail that the Park Service maps completely ignore. If you're foolish enough to keep climbing into those high ridges where the wild ginseng still hides in the deep shade, you'll eventually stumble over old limestone foundations slipping into the black dirt. Folks down in the valley just call it forgotten ground. That's too gentle a word. Coal didn't fail up there, and the timber didn't run out. The people just soured. Something got into the wells, or maybe just into their blood. And back in the winter of '64, the entire Greer clan simply walked away from 300 acres of prime bottomland, leaving their iron stoves and family Bibles to rot. My name is Silas. I've spent 15 years working as a timber cruiser, which is just a fancy way of saying I walk lonely ridges alone, marking out white oak and walnut blocks for the small independent sawmills along the Kentucky border. You get used to the quiet in this line of work. You learn to read the woods like a book, the way a deer path bends, the color of fungus on a dying maple, the sound of the wind shifting through the gaps. But late one Tuesday afternoon in October, the book went blank. It was right around 4:30. The fog was pouring in thick from the river gaps, heavy and gray, swallowing whatever dim light was left under the canopy. The air took on a stagnant, foul smell, like wet shale mixed with rotten leaves that had stewed in a ditch all summer. Then, the woods went completely dead. No crows squawking in the upper branches, no squirrels rustling the dry leaves, not even the breath of wind through the hemlocks. It was that heavy, freezing stillness that settles over a hollow right before a killing frost. It loads up your chest, making it hard to draw a clean breath. I was wrapping up my charts and heading down toward the old logging trail when a splash of bright yellow caught my eye on a low oak limb. I stopped. It was a little kid's wool bonnet. The fabric was caked in dried yellow clay, but the wool wasn't rotted or torn up by the briars. It looked clean, like a mother had just set it down on that branch an hour ago. My hand went out to pull it down, but my skin crawled, and my arm froze solid mid-air. Nailed right into the trunk of the oak, directly beneath the yellow bonnet, was an old iron horseshoe. It wasn't turned up for luck. Someone had driven it upside down into the bark with heavy railroad spikes, and the wood around the rusted iron was actively weeping a thick, black grease. It didn't smell like sap. It smelled exactly like sulfur and burnt hair, so sharp it made my eyes water.
Silas.
The voice came out of the laurel thicket, maybe 20 yards ahead in the gray mist. It wasn't a growl or an animal noise. It was a woman's voice, soft, raspy, with that deep, rolling mountain drawl I hadn't heard since I was a boy. It sounded exactly like my grandmother.
You're late for supper, child,
the voice whispered, the sound scraping through the damp air.
Come on inside the cabin before the cold gets into your bones.
A cold sweat broke out under my canvas coat, soaking through my flannel shirt. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. My grandmother had been resting in the valley cemetery under 6 feet of red clay for 12 years. I slowly dropped my hand to my tool belt, my fingers locking around the slick hickory handle of my marking axe, my heart hammering so hard against my ribs I thought it would crack a bone. I ripped my headlamp off my hard hat, flipped the switch to the highest setting, and threw 1,000 lumens of white light straight into the tangled heart of the laurel thicket. The beam cut through the rolling fog, bouncing off the pale, twisted branches, and stopped dead. Standing just beyond the edge of the brush was a shape. It wore a faded calico dress covered in that same yellow dirt, but the thing inside the cloth wasn't a human being. The body was starved down to the gray bone, its limbs stretched out impossibly long and jointed backward at the elbows like a broken folding ruler. The skin on its hands was a dull, bloodless ash color, and its fingernails had grown into long, horn-like talons that were actively scratching against the rough bark of a pine tree. But it was the head that made my knees go weak. It had the long, blunt, heavy skull of an old draft mule, completely devoid of hair. It didn't have eyelids. 2 massive teacup-sized black eyes just soaked up the glare of my halogen light like 2 pools of stagnant, bottomless swamp water. It stared right through the blinding beam. Then, its mouth, dropping open with a sickening wet pop. Out of that long black throat came my grandmother's voice again, but the cadence was completely broken now. Hollow, mechanically slow, and dragging like an old hand-cranked phonograph losing its spring.
Silas, the fire is going out. Come to the porch.
Before I could even get air into my lungs, the thing didn't run. It dropped onto all fours. Its long gray limbs clattered against the limestone rocks as it lurched scrambled sideways into the open timber, keeping to the shadows. It covered the rugged, broken ground with a frantic, spider-like speed. Every time its heavy weight hit the forest floor, the ground beneath my own boots gave a low, dull thud that I could feel in my chest. I didn't wait for it to circle behind me. I turned and tore down that mountain grade faster than I ever thought a man my age could move. I busted straight through the briars, ruining my coat, my boots sliding and spinning on the slick shale. Behind me in the dark timber, the whole mountain seemed to come alive with that same raspy, stolen voice. It was calling my name from 3 different directions at once, the echoes bouncing off the high rock walls until the dark was a chorus of my own dead kin. I didn't stop running until I slammed my truck door, locked it, and jammed the keys into the ignition. My tires threw a cloud of river gravel as I fishtailed my way out of that cursed hollow and hit the state highway. I don't cruise timber on the high ridges after October anymore. The independent mills think I just lost my nerve in my old age, and I let them think it. Let 'em talk. But whenever the autumn mist comes down low over the gaps, and the wind through the kitchen door sounds a little too much like a person standing out in the yard calling for me, I make sure the deadbolt is thrown and the heavy iron bar is dropped across the frame. Up in the high country, you learn real quick that the dark isn't just looking to take your life. It wants what makes you. You. If you track the old Norfolk and western black iron rails deep enough into the limestone cuts of the Blue Ridge, you'll eventually find a concrete bunker half buried in the shale, completely choked out by wild kudzu and mountain ivy. The Department of Transportation records claim it's just an old automated signal relay station, decommissioned back during the transitor upgrades of 1961. That's the story they give the public. But if you ever pull the regional dispatcher logs from that October, you'll find a 72-hour blind spot where every eastbound freight train was ordered to stop dead, and 3 straight pages of telegraph tape were burned by federal transit marshals. My name is Arthur. In the autumn of 1961, I was working the night shift as the wire operator at switching station number 9, sitting in a concrete block room that smelled like hot vacuum tubes, heavy floor wax, and battery acid. My job was simple enough. Monitor the copper telegraph lines connecting the mountain timber camps to the main valley line, ensuring the freights didn't clip each other on the blind curves. The shift started out quiet, but the weather up in the gap turned ugly fast. A heavy autumn rain started lashing the concrete lintels, and the air inside the room grew so thick with static electricity that the oil lamp on my desk began to burn with a strange, flickering violet edge. It made the hairs on my arms tickle. That was when the brass telegraph key on my desk started clacking. It wasn't a normal message. Standard Morse code has a distinctly human rhythm to it. Little variations in the spacing, the natural weight of a man's hand on the key. This was different. Something was hitting that brass anvil with a brutal, mechanical speed, striking so hard it threw blue sparks right across my paper logbook. It was a single numeric sequence, repeating over and over, coming down the line from the restricted government vault, dug 600 feet into the limestone ridge at the top of the gap, a place that wasn't supposed to carry any civilian traffic or be connected to my board. I pulled the paper ribbon through the register, watching the brass teeth punch holes straight through the paper instead of leaving clean ink. Station 9 to Ridge Vault. I tapped back, my fingers clumsy and cold against the key. Your line is throwing heavy voltage. Check your grounding wire. Terminate transmission. The line went completely dead for 2 full minutes. The only sound left in the bunker was the low, heavy hum of the wall transformer and the rain hitting the glass. Then the receiver speaker on the wall, the old copper cone intercom we used for voice emergencies, burst wide open with a violent pop. It didn't hiss with the usual atmospheric crackle. It made a deep, hollow, rushing sound, like water being forced through a tiny iron valve miles away under the mountain. Beneath that noise, a voice came through the copper cone. It was clear, clipped, and professional. It was my own voice. It was reading the exact log entry I had written in my ledger an hour ago, down to the ink smudge on the margin. But the pacing was completely wrong. It was flat, rapid, and layered over itself, like 3 copies of the same tape playing at slightly different intervals in an echo chamber. The hair on my neck stood straight up. I wasn't speaking into a microphone. There wasn't even a voice line connected to my station from the high vault. I slowly backed away from the desk, my heavy work boots scraping loud against the concrete floor. The moment my heels hit the floorboards, the speaker answered the sound. The playback stopped instantly. Through the copper cone, my own synthesized voice spoke again, but the words began to scramble, twisting the familiar railroad terms into a slurred, rhythmic chant. The tracks are skin, Arthur, pull the spikes out of your teeth. The mountain is looking through the glass. A bright flash blinded me as the high-voltage lines running into the back of the switchboard blew out. The glass vacuum tubes shattered all at once, showering the desk in hot, smoking shards. The room went pitch black, except for a pale, violet glow bleeding right out of the copper telegraph wires. The wire wasn't just hot from the voltage. It was physically moving. The heavy copper cables draped along the ceiling were twisting like iron snakes, pulsing to a frantic, wet heartbeat. The copper was stretching out, growing thin, and pulling itself down through the porcelain insulators toward the floorboards, reaching out like vines. Outside the bunker window, the floodlights over the rail yard caught something coming down the steep gravel ballast from the high gap. It wasn't an animal, and it wasn't a man. It was a massive, undulating knot of insulated copper cables that had torn itself free from the underground vault's main junction box. The gray shielding was split wide open, revealing miles of raw, twitching wire that moved with the synchronized precision of a centipede. It didn't crawl over the iron rails. It was actively fusing itself to them, its raw metallic ends throwing arcs of blue static electricity as it hauled its rust-colored bulk toward my station door. And from the center of that writhing mass, my own voice was screaming from dozens of hidden speaker horns, all of them shouting my middle name in a deafening, distorted chorus that shook the glass. I didn't grab my coat. I didn't lock the switchboard. I threw my whole weight against the heavy oak door, burst out into the freezing rain, and sprinted down the cross ties toward the valley. The blue sparks of the tracking wires illuminating the dark woods behind me. The Department of Defense arrived at switch station number 9 at dawn. By noon, they had severed every telegraph wire along the 15-mile ridge, replacing them with standard radio frequencies and buried steel pipe. The public archives will tell you that the 1961 line closure was just a routine technological modernization. But I know why the old railroaders won't walk the high limestone cuts after midnight. If you stand near the abandoned concrete bunker when an autumn storm rolls in, the local track inspectors tell you to ignore the faint, rhythmic clicking coming from the rusted iron rails. They say it's just the temperature contraction of the steel in the cold air. But steel doesn't contract to the exact rhythm of your own pulse. In the Wayne County Courthouse Public Records Department, you won't find a single thing out of the ordinary regarding well number 407. The state's environmental registry just lists it as an abandoned exploratory borehole, plugged and reclaimed in November 1974. Today, it's just a jagged, forgotten ridge where the scrub pine and wild briars have completely reclaimed the old gravel turnaround. But those public files leave out the last 3 pages of the driller's log, and they sure as hell don't mention what the mud logging crew found when the diamond bit broke past the 9,000-foot mark into the unmapped Devonian shale. My name is Marcus. Back in the winter of '74, I was working as the lead roughneck for a wildcatting outfit we will just call Tease Energy. We were running a heavy rotary rig, chewing down through the solid limestone, trying to hit a tight gas pocket that our company geologists swore was trapped under a thick, ancient salt shelf. It was grueling, filthy work, but the pay was decent enough to keep us freezing on that mountain. It was a Tuesday night, right around midnight, with a bitter, freezing sleet coming down sideways and coating the iron derrick in ice, when the weight on bit indicator on the console suddenly dropped straight to 0. The drill string hadn't snapped off, and the diamond bit hadn't burned out. The massive multi-ton steel assembly had simply slipped out of the hard rock and dropped into a massive, unmapped subterranean void. The diesel engines on the rig floor, suddenly freed from the resistance of the stone, whined down into a low, echoing idle that sounded incredibly hollow in the storm.
We lost circulation.
The derrick hand yelled down from the crow's nest, his voice barely carrying through the freezing rain. Normally, losing circulation just means your drilling mud is emptying into a natural cavern or a small rock fissure. But this was different. The mud wasn't just draining. It was actively being sucked down into the earth. The heavy, barrette-weighted fluid was rushing down the throat of the well so fast it carved a visible, violent whirlpool right in the mud pits. A strange, rhythmic whistling sound, like a winter wind howling through a rusted iron pipe, began vibrating through the steel grating directly under my boots. The company man, a short-tempered engineer from Pittsburgh named Pete, refused to let us trip the pipe out of the hole to see what we'd hit.
Keep pushing,
He barked, wiping the icy sleet off his thick glasses with a greasy rag.
We're sitting right on top of a major natural gas reservoir. Mix the heavy reserve gel and get that bit back to bottom before the hole collapses.
We mixed up the thick, chemical mud as fast as we could and pumped it down the line under maximum hydraulic pressure. 10 minutes later, the well bore kicked back. It wasn't a standard gas blowout. There wasn't an eruption of natural gas or crude oil. Instead, the well blew a dry, freezing gale of putrid, stagnant air that coated the entire rig floor and our clothes in a fine, odd-colored silt. It smelled awful. Like an old slaughterhouse floor at the end of July, mixed with the sharp, metallic tang of old copper pennies. Then the drill string began to shudder. It wasn't the frantic, rattling vibration of a stuck bit. It was a rhythmic, deliberate heaving. The entire steel derrick groaned under a massive downward strain, as if something miles beneath us had wrapped its weight around the steel casing and was trying to drag the whole platform down into the dark.
Marcus?
The mudlogger, a quiet kid named Donnie, called out from the testing shack. His face was totally white, illuminated only by the green light of his monitors.
You need to see this right now.
I stepped into the cramped, overheated trailer. The mechanical geolograph was scratching a frantic, jagged ink line across the rolling chart paper.
The hydrocarbon readings are completely flat.
Donnie whispered, his hand shaking so badly he could barely point to the readouts.
There's no methane, no butane, nothing. But the acoustic sensors inside the borehole are picking up a cyclical frequency. Marcus, it's mimicking the exact RPM of our rig's diesel generator. Listen.
He flipped the audio toggle on the deep-hole microphone receiver. Through the heavy static of the small speaker, 9,000 feet beneath the Appalachian mountain rock, came a sound. It wasn't shifting tectonic plates or rushing water. It was a voice. It was deep, hollow, and distorted by thousands of feet of steel pipe, but I knew exactly who it belonged to. It was Pete's voice. It was speaking with the exact same harsh, clipped Pittsburgh accent we'd been listening to all night. Except Pete was standing right outside on the catwalk, screaming at the crew to keep working. The speaker rattled, sputtering out Pete's exact words from an hour earlier, but the phrasing was scrambled, stitched together into a slow, slurred distortion.
Pete, pushin', Marcus, poo, slips, them, here.
The mechanical playback possessed a sickening, manufactured quality, as if whatever was down in the dark was learning how to shape our language on the fly, testing the letters out. Before I could even draw a breath, the microphone feed exploded into a high-pitched, unmatched screech that cut through the trailer. Outside, the steel drill string gave one violent, upward lurch, snapping the heavy retaining chains like thread. Pete didn't run away. He ran straight toward the wellhead, looking directly down into the dark, vibrating throat of the blowout preventer. The high-beam floodlights on the derrick tower caught the movement as it breached the surface. It wasn't oil. A thick, pale froth, dense as curdled lard, began to bubble up over the iron flange. Out of that pale mire surged two gray, rubbery-looking limbs. They weren't human arms. They were flying forward in a grotesque, weirdly hinged alignment. Wide, shovel-shaped digits began clawing violently at the heavy iron bolts of the rig floor, hauling a massive, pale bulk out of the hole. I didn't stop to look for Pete, and I didn't wait for Donnie. I bolted down the steps of the rig structure, threw myself into the cab of my truck, and tore down the lease road, my tires spinning wildly across the loose stone in the sleet. The next morning, T's Energy officially terminated the lease without explanation. By noon, a specialized crew arrived with 3 cement trucks, filling the entire 9,000-foot void with quick-setting concrete before bulldozing the steel derrick right into the hollow. The public records will tell you that well number 407 was just a dry hole. But I know why the old wildcatters refused to go back up into that high gap area. The deeper you drill into the blood of these mountains, the more you realize that the rock isn't just holding oil. It's keeping something pinned down. If you made it through tonight's collection, pass it on to someone you want to keep safe, or maybe someone special you'd like to haunt. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next nightmare. Until next time, loves, stay safe and sleep well.